Well, listen, it is that time again. Listen, welcome here to Ruffin It, where we're talking about relationship empowerment. That's right. Listen, it is relationship empowerment that happens right here, this hour, this time, this moment. And so, listen, here's what I'm telling you to do. Let's do like we always do. That's right. Listen, we begin to let people know they need to be here. Why do we do that? We do that, why? Because, listen, there are people in your circle. There are people in your life. There are people that, listen, are impacted by you. And listen, the healthier that you and I can become in relationships, listen, the better everyone else can become. But you know what happens when all of us can get healthier in relationships? Then listen, that means that all of us get better. And because, listen, all of us are getting better, all of us are deciding to become healthier, to become more informed, to become more enriched, because we are making that decision about our relationships. Then therefore, listen, when we bring people into this space and place, we're helping them to be able to do the same. So that's right. If you're on YouTube, I'm asking that you would share this link. That's right. You can hit the share and you can get the link and you can share that to somebody, because you recognize that, listen, it's not that something is bad or something has gone wrong, or it's not that they're in some crisis. It's recognizing that, listen, all of us are constantly evolving. But listen, not all of us are constantly growing. I'm going to say that again. Listen, all of us are constantly evolving. Listen, your body is growing whether you want to or not, right? So because your body is changing, maybe say not growing, but changing, because your body is changing, listen, you're shedding skin, listen, hair is coming off. If you're like me, listen, some of it hasn't even grown back in places where it used to grow. So your body is constantly changing, but growth is intentional, and change does not equal growth. But growth does equal change. And so, listen, I just want you to know that, listen, we are in store for a great time today. We are in store for a wonderful time today. And so because this is the opportunity we have to be able to empower and to enrich our relationships, listen, I'm asking that if you're on YouTube, listen, that you would subscribe to our channel, that you would hit the bell icon so that you can get the notifications. Listen, if you are looking at this on your computer, I believe that there's a little crown in the corner. You can tap that and you can subscribe to our channel. And so, listen, I want you to know that if you're on Facebook, listen, like our page. This is brought to you by LifeEmpowermentCh. And so, listen, like our page. And as we say, listen, like, share, and follow. Like, share, and follow. Listen, because we're in store for part 4. That's right, listen. We are in store for part 4 today, as we are talking about dangerous expectations in relationships. That's right, dangerous expectations. And so we have been here now for the last 3 weeks. This is the 4th week. I believe that next week we will be bringing this to a close as we talk about what are 7 ways to actually examine our expectations. And so listen, so we're going to really kind of close this out in this next week. But right now, listen, we're getting ready to go right into our teaching on today. Now, for those of you that are familiar, those of you that have been here before, you know that we always tell you that, listen, you can ask questions in the moment if you're here at the live recording, broadcasting of this ministry time. So listen, you can put it right there on the YouTube channel. You can put it right on our Facebook page. Now listen, if you're watching this because somebody kind of shared this to a page or they shared the link with you, listen, you may not be on our particular Facebook page. And so I would need for you to come over to Life Empowerment Facebook page and be able to come right there so that I can see your questions that you would put in real time. Now, if you're watching this on the rebroadcast and you put questions later, then listen, that still gives us an opportunity to be able to catch that if you do it on Facebook. I don't know that it will notify us as much on, yes, you know what? It will notify us on YouTube. So that's what I say so that we can go ahead and dive into dangerous expectations. Now, I am a full believer in the spirit, soul, and body. And so I don't think that you can treat one without treating the other, or somehow one area affecting maybe one of the other areas. Very rare or seldom is it that you find that it's only something that is happening in this part of your makeup. Is usually something that has affected another part of your makeup. And so, listen, we always like to start off with a particular passage of scripture because it tells us truth. It gives us a principle here as we talk about expectations. And so here we've been reading this one throughout this entire teaching on expectation, dangerous expectations. And so here, as you see it behind me on the screen, Proverbs 13, verse 12, from the Amplified Bible, it says it this way. It says, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but when desire is fulfilled, it is a tree of life. And one of the things that we've been looking at with this particular passage is understanding, as much as that may seem pretty simplistic to some people, when you break it down even more, you understand that he's saying that, listen, hope deferred or expectation, that word hope can be translated as expectation. Expectation deferred or not met makes the heart sick, makes it afflicted, makes it grieve, even brings about disease. Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about that today because we want to really understand we want to really simplify the complexity of expectations, in particular, dangerous expectations. And so, therefore, when we see this passage, we understand that when you and I have expectations, and all of us will, and all of us do, that it is vital for us to understand how these expectations impact our life. Because here, and this has been the nugget of truth that we have really been looking at throughout every particular segment of this teaching, and that is unexamined expectations are the seeds of conflict and trouble. That's right, unexamined, not just expectation. It is the unexamined expectations, because the reality is that every relationship comes with expectations. I'm sure that you came here today with some expectations. Whether they are known or unknown doesn't mean that they don't exist. And so with every relationship comes expectations. And over the years, I've heard sometimes this statement which says, I thought. Have you ever said that yourself? You've been in a situation, something go the way that you expected, and you said, but I thought, and that's nothing more than saying, I had this expectation, and somehow this expectation is not manifesting. It is not showing up. It is not being fulfilled. And therefore, listen, unexamined expectations lead to preconceived ideas. How many times is it that we thought, simply because it was in our mind, simply because we thought that it was maybe common knowledge, common sense, that we have entered into some kind of activity, some kind of engagement with someone else, only to come to a place where we recognize they weren't thinking the same thing I was thinking. They didn't have the same idea. They maybe didn't even have the same conclusion about how this outcome should look. And so therefore, unexamined expectations are the seeds of conflict and trouble. And so when the scripture says that, listen, our heart, expectations not met, hope deferred, our heart would be sick, it would be afflicted, it would be diseased. Sometimes this is nothing more than our failure to examine our expectations so that we can know whether or not our expectations should be expectations that we should be maintaining, keeping, or even expecting. That's right. Should the expectations I have be expectations that I should expect? And because we're on part 4, I'm not getting into all those different types of variables that affect our expectations. I'm not getting into, you would have to go back and look at this on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. Under the video section, you can see these prior teachings that we've had on expectations. As I said, today is on part 4. And so therefore, listen, when we have this realization that unexamined expectations are the seed of trouble and conflict, we talked about how expectations are developed. Now, we went into this before, but this is really I'm not going to go in depth. I just want to highlight it as we go into what we're discussing today as it relates to dangerous expectations. And so here, when we're talking about how expectations are developed, we said that it comes forth in 3 different ways. It comes from family of origin. It comes from previous relationships. It comes from the culture, the media, the books, the entertainment. Those are usual ways. Now, obviously, there can be some other spaces and places where expectations will begin to kind of derive. But the reality is that these are the main mechanisms that are helping to develop our expectations. And because each person here, each person that you're in relationship with, have had a variety of different experiences growing up. And so their family of origin has impacted what they expect, what they don't expect. And that's good, bad, ugly, and somewhere in between. We're not saying that all of these expectations are wrong or right. We're just acknowledging that they exist. And so my family of origin helps inform or develop my expectations. Doesn't matter what my family of origin was like. I was raised by my grandmother. I was raised by my aunt. I was raised in a foster home. The reality is that all of those different family of origins create different types of routines and different types of expectations. And so previous relationships, those that I have been in relationship with, friendships, romantic relationships, extended family members, professional relationships, neighbors, all of these persons have had some kind of impact into who I am today. And then the culture, right? The media, the books, the entertainment. I mean, how many times have we driven past some type of advertisement where after seeing that advertisement, whether it was on a billboard, maybe it was on a commercial, maybe we even saw something that kind of flashed across our screen on social media, and bam, all of a sudden now we have a taste for pizza. We weren't even thinking about pizza, but that pizza looks so delicious. Now I have an expectation for it. And so all of these different outlets will impact how our expectations are developed. And so here's what I want to get to now, because when you understand that those particular outlets inform or develop your expectations, it is also being able to recognize that what happens after some time is that we begin to have an expectation script. That's right, listen. If you have lived long enough, I'm telling you that as you live longer, you begin to develop what I call expectation scripts. And this is where, listen, we get into a pattern of expectations that are developed through our experiences. And so the more that you and I have had an experience in this area, we have developed an expectation. So if I have had several dating relationships, I'm coming into that next dating relationship with a set of expectations that's a script. If I am going into a work environment, and let's say I have worked necessarily in this industry, maybe not necessarily at this location, but in this industry, I'm coming into that particular office, I'm coming to that particular company with a certain script that is based upon previous experiences, and this is shaping and forming my expectation. Now, whether I acknowledge these expectations, whether I talk out loud about them, doesn't matter. The reality is that they are there. Listen, if I am going to a church and I've had prior church experiences, I'm coming into that church with a certain level, a certain script of expectations. And the reason why I highlight this is because it's important that we recognize that the same way that we have certain biases, the same way that we have certain preconceived ideas, then it is that same acknowledgement that we have these scripts, these expectation scripts that are important, because if I recognize that I have them, then it helps me to know that when I am going into a discussion, I'm going into a relationship, I am going to deal with a subject matter, I have to first recognize I have a certain script coming into this. Right, wrong, good, bad, or ugly, I have a certain script. And because I have a certain script in this particular dynamic, I've got to be aware of that. But sometimes this script can get in the way, because this will lead to sometimes preconceived ideas. And because I have these preconceived ideas, sometimes my preconceived ideas can actually be concrete facts that I have determined this is how this is supposed to go. You know, if I have gone to a particular restaurant and I say, okay, here's the kind of service that I should be receiving. And I get to that restaurant, and granted, let's say they're having a bad day. Let's say they're short-staffed. Let's say all kinds of things that have happened that have changed the way that that would usually take place. Well, I may not be informed about that, but that therefore is going to impact maybe my experience, and is going to maybe be even significant if I've had these expectations, this expectation script, and I'm saying this is how it's supposed to go, and it doesn't go that way. And sometimes what happens in our relationships, we have these preconceived expectation scripts, and when we get enough experiences in this particular relationship that is not going the way that I preconceive that they should operate, it puts me in a place of being upset. Like the scripture says, listen, my heart will be afflicted. It puts me in a place where my emotions will be afflicted. My thinking will be afflicted. Listen, how I feel will be afflicted. And it is being able to just acknowledge that things are not going the way that I thought that they should go, regardless of who's at fault or if no one's at fault. But it is recognizing that I have a script. And the more that I am aware of that script, the more that I can put myself in a healthier place. That's right. Listen, the more that I can be aware of that script, the more that I can put myself in a healthier place. Because I can at least own that this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm expecting. This is what I'm setting myself up for in terms of my hope. And if this doesn't go the way that I am expecting it to go, I can at least be prepared to embrace that this was not necessarily, going back to our unrealistic expectations. Remember, unrealistic expectations are non-communicated or non-agreed upon. And so I may be walking into a situation with an unrealistic expectation because I have an expectation script. How many relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, marriages, how many of these relationships are we in which there is an expectation script and the other person doesn't know their part? The other person doesn't know their lines. The other person doesn't know that, okay, here's where the next scene comes in, and here's what you're supposed to say. Here's what you're supposed to do. Here's how you're supposed to act. They have no awareness of this script. But in our minds, listen, we remembered our lines. We remember how we're supposed to dress. We remember how we're supposed to sound. We have it all down packed to a science. But the other person has not been informed. The other person has not been given their script. And so therefore, listen, we have set ourselves up for failure. And so we've got to be able to recognize that we have these expectation scripts. And here's the one thing that's important about these scripts is that often what happens is that these are not flexible scripts usually. These are not adjustable scripts per se. These are usually scripts that where we have convinced ourselves. Remember, they're preconceived ideas sometimes, but we have been sold on them so much that we consider them to be concrete facts. And so therefore what happens, these are shoulds. These are not, well, maybe ifs. These are not, okay, possibles. These are shoulds. This is how it should happen. This is how it's supposed to happen. And if it doesn't happen this way, then listen, I'm probably going to be extremely upset, all depending upon how strong my should is in this particular scenario. You know, one of the things I have told you all about was in my own marriage, we had talked about my expectation of having a hot meal cooked. I did not know how to cook. I believe that my wife should have come to the table with those particular skill sets, which she did. And so therefore, I'm saying, hey, when I come home from work, I expect a hot meal. I expect hot meals to be cooked at these various times. But the reality was, this expectation script had come from the fact that that was what happened in my family of origin. My dad always cooked. There was always a hot meal. And because I was used to having meals prepared when I came home, I'm now going into marriage with that same experience, preconceived ideas. Although they were communicated and agreed upon, so they were not unrealistic, the reality is that they became unreasonable expectations. You have to go back to last week to be able to get more information on unreasonable expectations. But it became an unreasonable expectation simply because time was not the same. And because time was not the same, listen, she was having things to do for work. She was having things to do outside of work. We're involved in ministry. And so all these different elements are affecting what I preconceived to be something that should be done all the time. And I had to readjust my expectations simply because not that they were unrealistic, but they became unreasonable. But part of what I had to do was go back to this script, this expectation script that had been developed over years of my life. And now, because time and availability and other variables are now in the equation, this is not realistic. But the problem, I could have put it all on her and made her responsible, made her at fault, and just played the blame game. Or I could have stepped into a healthier place in which I did. And because this was not solved as easy as I'm telling you this was not solved overnight. This was solved over some time. And so I had to come into a healthier place and really look at, why is this script so important? And I had to look at, is this still reasonable, although this was communicated and agreed upon some time ago? And that was where I had to make some adjustment. I'm going to get into that a little later. But here's where we have to understand that expectation scripts often become shoulds, not maybes, not possibilities, not, if and, but they become shoulds. And when those shoulds are not met, they set us up for failure. They set our relationships up for defeat. And so we've got to sometimes be conscious to comb through, what is my expectation script? Because we're talking about relationships. We're not talking about what's important to me. We're talking about what's important to the relationship. And sometimes we've got to make changes. And sometimes they got to go back to not the relationship. Before we even get to that, they got to go back to me and look at, what is my expectation script? What have I developed over time in this particular area of my life? All right, I'm looking to see whether or not I have any questions here. I don't see any questions. I'm looking here on YouTube, looking here on Facebook. I don't see any questions there. So, all right, I'm going to continue to go forward. So remember now, unexamined expectations are the seeds of conflict and trouble. And so, because I keep highlighting that, it's because we've got to constantly examine these things. Just because I examined them some time ago doesn't mean that I don't need to do a review. I don't need to do an update. Listen, I may even need to do some maintenance on my expectations because maybe they've gotten a little out of hand. Maybe they've gotten a little out of control. And it's not because of anything happening in a relationship. Maybe it's simply what's happening in me. And so, listen, because we've talked about how expectations are developed, I want to talk a little bit about how expectations are formed. Because how expectations are developed are the outside influences that affect me, that affect you. But when we talk about how expectations are formed, this is the part that I have more control over. See, when I'm driving down the street or I flick on the TV and I see something that, creates an expectation, I can turn the channel, obviously. I can look away. But in terms of its influence on me, it happened partially outside of my control. But here are the elements that are totally within my control. Simply because I have that flashing coming across, my family of origin. It came across through my previous relationships. It came through the culture, the media, the books, the entertainment. The reality, this I have control over. And so here's how expectations are formed. The first place that they're formed are through my thoughts. Second place that they're formed are through my desires. Third place that they are formed then is expectation. See, sometimes we feel like we go from 0 to 60, and so therefore we just kind of jump right into an expectation. No. There are some things that happen before that. I'm going to break this down even a little more. But here's the real killer, is that expectations sometimes turn into demands. And that's where they become dangerous. Because when they become demanding, that means that it becomes these sort of win or lose scenarios. It becomes either it's going to happen or there's going to be some sort of something that is going to be not healthy as an outcome. See, the more that my demands are heightened, the more that the relationships become in jeopardy. Because there's no relationship that works well under demands. Now, obviously, when we're talking about a legal battle or we're talking about some sort of war, those are not the kind of relationships or the kind of scenarios that I'm referencing. I'm talking about people in which they're choosing to be in relationship with you. You're choosing to be in relationship with them. And so it is when demands creep in, it jeopardizes the healthiness and the welfare of the relationship. And so notice now how expectations are formed. I said, number one, they come through the thoughts. What happens? We begin to have ideas or opinions about what's available. And so when you think about the relationships that you have, you think about your friendships, you think about your romantic relationships, you think about your spouse. The reality is that you and I have some thoughts about what should be available to us in this relationship. You and I all think this way. Remember, there's no relationship that is without expectations. And so what happens is you and I begin to have ideas and opinions about what should be available. That's where it all starts. Now, those thoughts may come through the media. They may come through previous relationships. They may come through my family of origin. But those are thoughts that I have control over. But those are thoughts or opinions that tells me this is what should be available accessible in my relationship with you or with that person or with this group, right? And then what happens is that it moves from thoughts to desires. Now, this is when it has moved from just an opinion or an idea to now it has moved to feelings, right? So it's almost like, if I compare it to food, it's like, the thought was the whiff. When you smell something that is very appealing to your senses, or appealing to your nostrils, and you start smelling some of that good old baked goods, or you smell some of that good old cooked food, like, chicken or a steak, especially if it was grilled. Listen, the aroma is the thoughts. But after the aroma hits you for a while, listen, you start having desires. And sometimes all depends on how hungry you are will determine how strong that desire is. And so what happens in relationships is that we have these thoughts, and then we have these desires, right? We have these strong feelings. And now it has moved into second gear. And so instead of us just thinking maybe, I should have this available, this should be accessible to me in my relationship with you. Now all of a sudden I have these strong desires about what I am wanting from you, what I am strongly having a taste for from you. And so because now I'm having not just a thought, but I'm having a desire, it moves this to a whole nother level. Now, I'm going to explain why all this is important, but I'm telling you how our expectations are formed. And so what happens after your thoughts turns into desires, then you have expectations, right? So now we've kicked this into third gear, right? And so in third gear, now I have settle a little more with this particular feeling, with this particular idea, with this particular thought. I've settled a little more with it. And because I've settled a little more with it, now I have a strong belief that something can happen. See, I moved from just having this sort of awareness about what was available. Now this has moved to a belief that this is something that can happen. And once again, all depends upon how strong that expectation may be, may make this something that is strongly that I want to happen. Not just something that can happen, but this is something that I strongly want to happen. And this is the reason, listen, here's the reason why I'm talking about how expectations are formed, is because, remember, you and I have control over our expectations. And because you and I have control over our expectations, once we understand how expectations are formed, it helps us to be able to recognize what we can do about these expectations when they're good and sometimes when they're great, but also when they are bad and sometimes when they're horrible. Because listen, expectations sometimes in the wrong time, not necessarily the expectation itself, but expectations at the wrong time can be just as lethal and just as deadly, simply because if I don't really have a good grasp on this, I can demand that this happen at a time that this is not good. But I can be so caught up in the desire. I can be so caught up in the thought. I can be so caught up in the belief that when I am so absorbed by it, that I lose all common sense by which I can now say, you know what, maybe this isn't good. Maybe this isn't a good time. Maybe I should back off of this. Let me give you an example. Have you ever had something that was really on your heart? Maybe it was a good experience, not necessarily something bad, but it was a good experience. And you called the person that you wanted to tell that to, only for them to maybe not answer the phone. And you're like, why don't you pick up the phone? Why you have a strong desire to communicate with them, and they're not available. And sometimes, they don't answer the phone. Or let's say they answer the phone and we just go, we just go straight into it. And we don't even know if this is even a good time for them to talk. And God knows if we're trying to tell them something and we're very excited or we're very hurt or very devastated and we're trying to tell them, and all of a sudden they're like, hold, stop, I can't talk right now. You're like, what do you mean you can't talk? Right? It will totally change the dynamic of it all. And here's why. Because we had a strong desire that turned into a strong belief, and we are now not prepared for the person to say that they can't help execute this. And now we're upset, we're bothered, we're mad, we're frustrated. And I'm telling you, you get so many of those that occur in a relationship, and you can take a good relationship and it can turn real bad. And that's not because of anybody's personally or intentional efforts to kind of create a detrimental impact in relationship. But it is sometimes these sort of variables, this unexamined expectation, this expectation script that we have not really looked into. And so it can take a good relationship and make it turn sour. So I'm telling you, listen, after expectations, then this is where we talk about demands. And this is where you and I can become insistent. And sometimes, listen, we can even feel entitled that something must or should happen. Now, granted, I recognize that I'm talking about scenarios where persons are in relationship with you. They want to be in relationship with you. I'm not talking about where you may have to stand your ground in some area because somebody has done something wrong. They violated you. They have been disrespectful. I understand. Listen, we may have to be a little more demanding in that kind of scenario. But even then, here's what I'm telling you. You and I have to recognize what is the effect of this. What is the impact of this, especially in relationships in which we're wanting to be with these persons. And sometimes, listen, they can say something wrong. They can do something wrong. And if we're not careful, we can get so caught up in the moment that we say something that we regret. We can do something that we can't take back. And it's simply because our expectations got out of control and they went into a demand level. Listen, this is fourth gear and above. They went into a demand level. And I'm telling you, demand levels in healthy relationships usually are where we're outside of the boundaries. We're outside of the healthy parameters. And I'm telling you, this is where it can have detrimental impact on your relationships. And I'm looking to see if anybody has a question here. I'm looking, I don't see any questions here in regards to what we're talking about here on Facebook. I'm looking here on YouTube. Okay, so with that being said, here's what I want to say. Once you and I recognize this whole component regarding expectations and this expectation script, it is recognizing, listen, that even with the best intentions, with the best communication, sometimes we still end up in a place where we have unfulfilled expectations. Sometimes these are things that we could have done something about. Sometimes it's where we could not have done anything about. But it is these unfulfilled expectations, listen, whether you have verbalized them or not, they lead to disappointment, they lead to conflict, they lead to anger, and listen, and sometimes they even lead to mental health issues. Because remember now, expectations not met, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Remember now, sick being afflicted, disease, grieved. And sometimes, listen, people become depressed as a result of unfulfilled expectations. I mean, how many people have we seen in this year with the shutdowns and the pandemic and all the different adjustments and changes that have happened that have led to people saying, I just can't handle it. And they're choosing all different types of unhealthy coping mechanisms. I mean, listen, they are choosing alcohol. Domestic violence has gone on the rise. All sorts of maladies have come out. And that's simply because people are having to deal with things that they have not been used to addressing. And so this is why I'm saying that, listen, unfulfilled expectations are real. Sometimes there were things that, in looking back, hindsight, we could have done something different. There are times in which we couldn't. But when it does happen, it is being able to embrace, this is what I'm going to feel. This is maybe what I'm going to think. But I can still manage this by being able to cope with it. Coping with it may mean I may need to talk to somebody. Coping with it may mean, I got to separate from you for a minute so that I can get myself together, because I may lash out at you because where I am in my feelings, I'm in a demand state. And because I need to calm down, I need to be able to cool off, it helps me to be able to recognize that so that I can manage me. Because when the situation and the scenario is out of control, I cannot allow it to mismanage me. And so this is why unfulfilled expectations are real, but this is why unfulfilled expectations have to be expected. And because you and I have to expect that, it is being able to recognize that it will happen. But how will I handle it now that I can be aware that sometimes this is going to be the outcome? Because when I am not aware of it and I'm not prepared for it, that's when sometimes it does even more damage, because I didn't recognize I was in such a demand state that, listen, it's just like being on a high building. The more that I'm in demand state, the higher I am in my expectations. And remember, hope deferred, expectations not met make the heart sick. And that means that when I drop, it's a long drop, but it's usually a fast and quick one. And so I've got to be able to prepare myself for how to deal with unfulfilled expectations, just as much as I am aware that I need to understand my expectations. So listen, I'm looking to see whether or not anybody has any questions here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. I'm checking here. I don't see anything right now, so it looks like we're all good. And so listen, I thank you so much for being here. Remember, whether you're looking to improve, your love relationship, a familial or family relationship, or friendships or employer-employee relationships, here's what we do know, that here at Ruffin, relationship empowerment, that remember, understanding your expectations will bring a new dynamic to the situation. Listen, we have been talking here about how to really recognize expectations, recognizing when they become dangerous, recognizing what I can do about it, because listen, I have the ability to do something about the expectations that I possess. I can't do anything about the expectations somebody else is possessing unless we communicate and we can talk about it and we can work through them. But if I am looking at me, I'm able to recognize that my expectations matter, but it's also my expectations that I've got to manage. They just can't matter, but I've also have to manage. And so listen, I hope that you have had a great time here today with Ruffin It, as we have talked about dangerous expectations. Part 4 today. Listen, next week, Thursdays, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we're going to talk about part 5 of this, and then we'll bring this to a close and we'll go into something new. Why? Because we're here at Ruffin and want to empower your relationships. Listen, if you're watching this on YouTube, we want you to subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the subscribe button, hitting the bell icon. Listen, if you're on Facebook, we're asking that you like our Life Empowerment Church page so that you can follow us and you can be aware when we go live and you can get those notifications. And so, listen, we thank you for being here today. Here's what I'm also asking. If you believe that this has been a real treasure, this has really helped move the needle, this has blessed you in some way, here's what I'm asking. I'm asking that you would help to support Life Empowerment Church. This is who sponsors this broadcast. This is how this happens. And so we thank you for the opportunity to be able to support Life Empowerment Church. There are a few ways in which you can do that. You can do that here through the Cash App, LifeEmpowermentCh. You can do that through our Cash App. Another way that you can do that is through our PayPal. Now, we have a PayPal account there, and so as you see here on the screen, there is LEC at let-god.org. That is our PayPal information. Listen, you can also support us by going directly to our website, and you can give through that mechanism, let-god.org, and so we appreciate you doing that. Or listen, if you wanted to send us a check or send us a money order, our mailing address is Life Empowerment Church, P.O. Box 7958, Moreno Valley, California, 92552. And so that information is right there on your screen. And so listen, so we thank you so much for you being able to be here today to support and being able to be empowered for our relationships. And so listen, tomorrow, listen, we have Noonday Prayer at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we encourage you to be here for that because listen, it is nothing like being able to be empowered through that time. It's about a 30-40 minute segment. And so we thank you so much for you being there in that moment and in that time. And so listen, we want you to know that, listen, we appreciate you being here today for Ruffin. We pray that this has been a real empowering time for you. Listen, if it has been, be sure to share this with somebody. Be sure to let them know, hey, here's some nuggets I think that can help you, maybe help us, maybe help them in their relationship. Why? Because we understand that once we understand principles and we understand executions, then listen, we can have healthier and better and empowering relationships. I appreciate you being here today. I look forward to seeing you the next time as we gather next Thursday, 4 p.m. You be empowered in your relationships and you be blessed.